are on my Kindle, and the other two are physical copies. So, a few of my clips were unwatchable because, unbeknownst to me, my light in the background started malfunctioning, so I'm going to refilm some of those clips today. And I really did not feel like doing my hair and makeup again, so you're going to get some overhead shots. I hope you don't mind. Before we begin, if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe. It would mean so much to me. Let's start with the first book. This is This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. Ever since Vera and Tiago bought the Itza, life has gotten strange. The ads for the world's most advanced smart speaker didn't mention scratching in the walls, eerie music in the dead of night, or peculiar packages. Who ordered industrial strength lie? It's weird but amusing, right up until Vera is killed and Tiago's world becomes unbearable. The only thing left to do is to get as far away from Chicago as possible. But Tiago soon realizes there is no escape, not from his guilt, not from his anger, and not from the evil hunting him, feeding on his pain, looking for a way into this world. So this book was actually a recommendation from one of you, and if you were that person, please let me know, because how could you do that to me? Oh my gosh, this book was incredible, but horrifying and emotional and devastating and just everything that I want a horror book to be. It was such a real and devastating depiction of being in the throes of grief and pain and trauma. I don't think I've ever read a book like this before. I had read about this book a while ago and forgot to write the name down. And then when that commenter left this as a recommendation, I was really excited to read this. The technological aspect of this book isn't really the main focus. It's really only in the first part of the book. Also, this book is written in parts instead of chapters. And I think there's 4 parts. Yeah. This was just a very interesting book. I started it on a Wednesday afternoon and finished it on Thursday night. The ending of this book was absolutely wild. There is a little extra chapter at the end of the Itza Starter Guide manual, and I was really curious, what that was going to have in it because of the way the story ended. I was like, oh, we're going back to this, okay. But it was honestly chilling. The last couple of pages literally gave me goosebumps. This was just really a super interesting book. I cried. There was a little bit of humor in it. It scared the hell this was in the, I want to say it was like mystery suspense category, and it sounded really good, so I chose it. This is the book that I DNF'd though. I just realized the lighting was looking kind of funny, and I looked very orange, so I changed my setting, and hopefully I don't look like a carrot anymore, but we'll see. Raj and Rachel Ranjani have invited a small group of their ride or dies from college for a celebratory weekend in Napa Valley. On the agenda, 3 nights in the couple's vineyard mansion, a lavish dinner at Napa's hottest new restaurant, exclusive tastings, and the grand opening of the Ranjani's ultra-high-end winery. It's a reunion of 6 friends who haven't seen each other in years. What could go wrong? To start, there's the less than warm welcome, a brick flung through a window, and palpable tension between the hosts. But no worries. All Raj has to do is pop a few bottles of vintage Tom, and the college vibes come rushing back. So do old resentments, animosities, and unrequited crushes. Soon enough, the illusion of friendship shatters like a gossamer wine glass, and one of the friends ends up dead. Everyone has their motives. Everyone has something to hide. Here's to a weekend in the valley. Drink up and watch your back. So, that sounds really, really fantastic. I did not finish this book, and I can't say that I'm not going to go back and finish it, but I just really wasn't feeling it. I was on chapter 11. I'm about 64% of the way through the book, and honestly, it just was not doing it for me. I found it quite boring, and if I could review what I've read so far in a sentence, it would be rich people, they have problems too. There was a ton of real life references in this book, which I don't mind when books reference real life people or things or places, but it was like every other page had some sort of real life reference. I read books to escape real life, and when there's just like mention after mention of real world things, it just kind of takes me out of it, and it kind of seems, I don't know, cheesy to me. All of the characters just seemed very insufferable, and especially the men. Everything they said was so cringy, like my eyes were rolling out of my head. I do think that I will eventually finish this book, but I don't know if it's going to be worth it or not, because so many of the reviews were bad that I read after I decided to stop reading this. There were a couple of reviews that even said, I wish I had just Googled the ending of this book because it was not worth it. I wasn't entertained. It didn't hold my attention. I was invested in none of the characters at all. They all seemed completely awful to me. So, it wasn't for me. It's a no for me, dog. I'm sorry. If I do end up finishing it, as it should be, except last year, KSMI was rocked by a scandal involving a student-teacher affair with one student, Addie, at its center. But Eve knows there is far more to these ugly rumors than meets the eye. Addie can't be trusted. She lies, she hurts people, she destroys lives. At least that's what everyone says. But nobody knows the real Addie. Nobody knows the secrets that could destroy her. miss the reach. Before she can stop him, the dog charges into the water to retrieve what first appears to be a wayward stick, but to her horror turns out to be something much more sinister. The next morning, 3 women in and around London, Fatima, Thea, and Isa, receive the text they have always hoped would never come from the fourth in their formerly inseparable clique, Kate, that says only